Thoughts podcast. Hi, this is Shane Vander. Welcome back to another episode. So, with extra time that you may have because of COVID-19, what are you doing? You know, those of you who are introverts, which I identify among you, I'm probably not completely introverted, but I definitely tend to that side. This is actually, it's been like you're telling me I have to stay away from people. That's great. I'm not bothered by that at all. Frankly, nothing much has changed for me because I work from home anyway, so I'm usually always home. I've got my dogs. My wife has been home a little more frequently during the day than she has before. But other than that, it's kind of like a typical day for me. So home with my dogs alone. But we're not able to go out. We're supposed to stay home as much as possible. This creates some extra time. What are you doing with that? Are you binge watching Netflix, or perhaps you can take up reading once again if you kind of dropped out of the habit of reading. I confess that I have not been the best reader of books. I read a lot of tweets, a lot of blog posts, a lot of articles, but books I haven't done so well on lately. So, what are you doing with your time? Are you working to maybe pick that habit back up? I had a conversation with Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor. She's the author of On Reading Well, and we talk about reading habits and what she likes to read and how we can not only pick up the habit of reading once again, but also instill it in our kids' lives as well. Also talk to her about a recent accident she had and challenges she faced and how she overcame that. And then also her new role. She's currently the professor of English at Liberty University, and she's going to be teaching next fall at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. So I asked her about that switch. We also discuss the recent Revoice conference controversy she was involved with and her thoughts on that. So before we get to that, first, a word from our sponsor, American Principles Project.
At American Principles Project, we believe that human dignity should be at the heart of public policy. We work in all 50 states and in Washington, D.C. to promote life, religious freedom, local control over education, authentic economic progress for working Americans, and a return to constitutional principles such as federalism. Want to help American Principles Project? Visit our website today, AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. That's American Principles, PLES, project.org. Sign up for email updates. Help us out. We want to work with you. That's AmericanPrinciplesProject.org.
And we're back. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor. Hey, Karen, welcome to the Caffeinated Thoughts podcast.
Thanks for having me, Shane.
Very welcome. Very welcome. So, I have said in the past, and when I'm not feeling well, that I feel like I've been hit by a bus. You've actually know what that feels like, and I suspect it feels probably considerably different than when I say it. Talk us a little about your accident and what God taught you through that.
Yeah, well, there definitely is a reason why that expression exists. A couple of reasons. One is because it really doesn't feel good. And second, because if you Google getting hit by a bus, you will find that bus pedestrian accidents like the one I had are really pretty common, especially in the city of Nashville, Tennessee, where I was one morning about almost 2 years ago, heading to a meeting and getting myself lost and stepping into a crosswalk and not seeing the bus until it hit me. And then I ended up spending the next 8 days at Vanderbilt Hospital, which is a really great facility. If you're going to be hit by a bus, then, you
highly recommend it. Yeah.
I highly recommend it. But I had a fractured spine, broken ribs, fractured pelvis, collapsed lungs, a head injury, and had to have a pelvic screw put in that, the next morning is the surgery that I had, and then had to spend the next 3 months recovering at home and not able to put weight on the fractured side. So had to use a walker and a wheelchair. And then after that period of recovery, go through physical therapy. And I'm pretty well recovered. And, I'm amazed and thankful that it wasn't much worse than it was, because as bad as it was, it could have been a lot worse.
What kept you going through the recovery process? I mean, I would have gone stir crazy. I think I think that would be difficult to not be able to. I think we're so used to, we take for granted just being mobile. So what were things that you focused on? What were things that helped you through that time?
Well, it's interesting because I had just finished the manuscript, doing the final edits on the manuscript for my book on reading well, which came out later that year. And that book is not only about great books, but it's looking at some of these great works of literature through the lens of the classical virtues. So I had literally spent the previous 2 years researching, studying, and writing about virtues like courage and patience and humility. And so I had this knowledge in my head about what these things were and what they looked like and how they can be practiced. And then I got the opportunity to actually try to practice them. And
Right.
so that definitely helped. But also just, I think, I've never really had a lot of trauma, never had any real physical pain in my life before this experience. And I don't, until you've gone through it, you really don't know. And that's something I've always heard people say about things, and, and you don't believe it until it happens to you. But there's something about being in the moment, being thankful, first of all, that I was alive, being thankful that, there's no danger of me being paralyzed or anything like that. We ruled that out quickly. And then also being in a good amount of physical pain, that you get through you just do the next thing in front of you. And going stir crazy wasn't really an option when, I just surviving day to day, just being, having my husband prepare meals for me and help me to go to the bathroom and having to be assisted in taking a shower and all of those things. It's just, that's what's right in front of you. And so I didn't have the luxury or feel the luxury to think about, driving and running around and getting back to my normal life until my body was really ready for it.
Were you able to do any writing at that time?
Well, what I imagined, even in those days when I was still in the hospital and kind of knew, we knew what had happened and what the prognosis was and all those things, I had this idea that I would be able, I was thought, well, I'll be at home and in bed for a few months and I'll do all this reading because I love reading even more than writing. But those pain medications really do a number on your brain. And I did not, they do. I did write a few things. So I guess I can, if anyone wants to look those up and take issue with them, I can blame the pain medications. But, so it's just, the physical and mental toll on your body because of the injuries and the drugs, just didn't, I just thought, wow, this will be a writer's and reader's dream, just nothing to do but lie around. And it really didn't work out that way.
Yeah. So, we're coming upon a time with this COVID-19 crisis and people staying at home and people being encouraged, a lot of governors actually shutting things down. I don't know if that's happening in Virginia. You reside in Virginia, correct?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
We're having some strict limitations put on us. Yeah.
So we got a lot of time on our hands, and I think with the advent of social media and blogging, and because I can raise my hand and say guilty as charged, our reading habits I think have deteriorated. But now would probably be a good time to pick that back up and make some changes. What would you suggest to people just getting back into the habit of reading and the beginning of their journey to start reading well?
That is a great question, and I want to confess that the struggle is real, even for me, someone who is a lifelong reader and lover of books. And even in the midst of this crisis that we're in now, I thought that I would have read a lot more in these last few days. I'm also on spring break, and so this shutdown kind of coincided with that. But I find that that this being in the midst of this crisis, I'm like other people, I'm sure, kind of drawn to the 24-hour news cycle, drawn to the social media to see what's going on, and that pulls you in. And so you really, and this applies to myself too, you really have to be intentional, and maybe even just put the phone away or get the app off your phone, set a timer, sit down and say, I'm going to read for 30, 45, 60 minutes, and I'm not going to look at my phone, or I'm not going to turn the news on, because it takes a while for our brain to kind of get into that different mode of the immersive, deep, reflective reading that's required of a good book, and which is the opposite of the kind of skimming, quick, impulsive shots here, one shot after another with the likes and the retweets that we get on social media.
Right.
So it's a very, very different experience, and we have to. It's just like exercise. You have to exercise those other muscles of deep reading, which are so different from social media reading.
Yeah, definitely. So I know I have to be intentional, which is. Let me ask you: do you read from a Kindle all, or are you one of those people that it has to be, a book in my hand?
It has to be a book in my hand. And I mean, I've not used a Kindle. I tried a Nook years ago. For me, I have so many books, and I like to be able to read with a pen in my hand and mark and underline, and I just like to feel the weight of the book in my hand and smell the pages. And I'm not saying there's, if people enjoy the Kindle and find that more convenient, I think that's better than nothing, especially if it's one of the ones that really replicates the pages of a book as much as it can. But cognitive scientists do find that when we are reading on a screen versus a page, we actually do use different parts of our brain. And I can actually just kind of feel that. I can feel which part of my brain is working and thinking. It really is different with a book. And so I just haven't.
Which is interesting that, you wonder why that's the case, especially if you're actually reading something long form. Yeah, interesting. I'd have to read those studies, but so it was somebody who's just getting back into reading. What would be some of your recommendations? What are some of your favorite books?
Well, I mean, I love to know more about a person's interests and in giving book recommendations, because
Sure.
One of the things that I will say is that there are so many great books out there that definitely pick up something that interests you, even if it's challenging you. So there are great books for every category. I just compiled a list over the weekend because of the coronavirus crisis, kind of my 6 books for reading during a time of quarantine. And for example, one book that's not, it's not a great work of literature, but it is kind of a modern classic, and it has a lot of great literary qualities. It's Stephen King's The Stand, which is about some, germs released into the world. And
are we sure we want to read about that right now?
I find reading, one of the things I love about reading is that it helps to sort of objectify, reify my fears and my anxieties and let me examine them rather than keep them internal.
Okay.
And so for me, that's comforting. But a more calm and I think optimistic book, which is really great, is Leif Enger's Peace Like a River. It's a great story. And then, of course, there are any kind of classic, like a work by Charles Dickens or Jane Austen or Charlotte Bronte, Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. There's so many good classics, and especially I encourage people to revisit some of those that they might have read during high school and learned to hate,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think at that age we're really, cognitively or constitutionally able to appreciate some of those works, and returning to them can be such a redemptive experience because we can see them so differently through our adult eyes and experiences.
What are you finding as far as you teach English at Liberty University? You have college freshmen coming in. I assume you teach some college freshmen anyway. What are you seeing as far as their background in classical literature? Are they reading enough classical literature in high school?
Yeah, I don't teach a lot of freshmen. I teach my mainly English majors and
Okay.
graduate students, but I do occasionally teach a freshman level class, and they really are not reading as much literature. There's a lot more young adult literature out there, and they tend to read that. If I get young readers who have been reading since they were young and love literature or think they do, often it's because they've had a steady diet of Harry Potter over and over and over,
Mm.
which I have nothing against Harry Potter, but I am finding that people who love those kinds of stories, young people especially, will often just read those, and not read some of the classics. So the challenge before us as English professors and parents and teachers to introduce ourselves and our children and students to these works is greater than before, but the works
Hmm.
are just as good. So I think it's worth taking up that challenge and maybe meeting students where they are, but helping them to read these works, and that might just require more support and assistance from us.
So, as far as I think a lot of my wife and I homeschooled our three kids, and now they're all graduated, and my youngest is 20, so she's going to be a nursing school graduate here pretty soon. But we installed a love of learning in each of our kids, and at least we knew when they graduated, we may not have been necessarily the best math teacher, but we knew they read well and they could read
Mhm.
well. And I guess my question would be is what advice would you give to parents? Because I think sometimes we want to put too much responsibility on the public schools and not take enough ownership onto ourselves as far as making sure our kids, have a love of reading and are spending time reading. Because I think it needs to start before they actually get to school. What would be some advice you give to parents as far as you know getting their kids off on that journey of reading?
Well, I agree with you. It really does start long before they go to school. And I think having it modeled at home, maybe even doing this as a family activity. And again, more and more, the science shows that the screen time isn't just time that's not spent reading, but it's actually time that contributes to the atrophy of the part of the brain that we use when we read books. So it's almost has a double effect. And so we have to be intentional about countering that. And again, like exercise, not just exercising one part of the body, but the other as well. And that includes our different reading capacities.
Okay, you're going to be starting a new job next term, fall, I believe, and you're going to be teaching in seminary. What's an English professor going to do in seminary?
Well, yes, after 21 years of teaching at Liberty University, beginning in the fall, I will transition to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Something that a lot of people don't realize about, well, all of the Baptist seminaries is that they have colleges associated with them. And so there is a college at Southeastern,
Okay.
and at that college, there are undergraduates who major in English and take English classes. So I will primarily be teaching English at the college. And I also, my title includes, is Research Professor of English and Christianity and Culture. So I'll also get to teach some classes on engaging the culture as Christians and as a church, because that's an area that I've developed in my own scholarship and writing. And so I'll do that as well. But primarily I'll be teaching English courses to undergraduates.
Okay. I wanted to ask you because you recently, well, I know you come under some criticism for this new role at Southeast Baptist Theological Seminary. Um, Mainly, I think because of your involvement or your initial endorsement of Revoice. I just want to ask you, as far as in the church engaging the LGBTQ community, what are your suggestions? What have we done well? What are we doing well? Um, and what's your view on people in same sex relationships?
Yeah, that's such a complicated question today, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think we for many years in the church and many decades in the American church, we've kind of fallen under two categories of either being, upholding the biblical sexual ethic, which I do, or completely embracing gay identity and lifestyle and so forth. And those have really been the only two categories for the modern era. And things are sometimes our modern categories don't really fit with biblical realities and human nature. And so I think that what the church has gotten right over 2,000 years is upholding God's beautiful design that we see in creation and we see as a metaphor in the relationship between Christ and his church. It's it's what holds creation together, this design, and perpetuates the human race and perpetuates God's image in his creation. Is beautiful and wonderful, and I love that the church, for the most part, over these 2,000 years, has upheld that.
Mm-hmm.
What we've gotten wrong, I think, is understanding that of course, homosexual behavior has existed throughout all of human existence. No one denies that on any side of this issue.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've entered the modern age, and modern and what it means to be sexual and to have an identity, that's part of what defines the modern age. And we do get influenced by our culture, and we also get influenced by heredity and environment, and this complicated mixture that we really don't understand. And so I know that there are people, faithful Christians in the church, who have done everything that they can to overcome a struggle that they don't want to have, to overcome desires that they don't want to have. And what the church has tended to do in the modern age is to deny those, or encourage people to just wish them away, pray them away, or not be open about that struggle.
Okay.
And I've seen that backfire. I've seen people marry and pretend that they didn't have the struggle. And so what I want to do, and what I think Revoice wants to do, and it's not doing it perfectly either, but is to support those Christians who want to live in biblical faithfulness, but also just want to be honest about the struggle. And that's where I think we are now, just trying to find that space where we can balance that delicately.
Yeah, I've had back when I had a radio program, had Rosaria Butterfield Champagne on to talk about her experience, and I've worked with high risk kids. I was in youth ministry for 20 years, and part of that time, 13 years, was working at juvenile offenders and high risk kids, and a lot of kids that struggle with LGBTQ issues, and I guess as a former pastor. My advice to when I do training with youth leaders is, first of all, recognize that God's called us to holiness, not necessarily heterosexuality. But and I guess this is kind of where I struggle, and I'm not sure where you're at with this. But one thing I think I struggle with, maybe with, and I don't want to mischaracterize the Revoice folks, but our identities in Christ ultimately. So I guess I have a problem with the phrase, I'm a gay Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Am I wrong?
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think that's a helpful phrase, and most of the people I know involved in Revoice don't use that phrase.
Okay.
I think maybe some do. And when that phrase is used, I mean, the problem with that phrase is that it can be used by someone who says what they mean by that phrase is, oh, I believe you can be a Christian and and live a homosexual life, and that's of course completely unbiblical. But other people might use that phrase as kind of shorthand for saying, I'm a Christian who struggles with same-sex attraction, and there's a shorthand way of saying that. We use shorthand in our lives all the time, and it's we're imprecise, and sloppy wording can lead to sloppy thinking. And for someone who loves language and studies language, I understand that that's important. But also, semantics is a word that means we have to find out what someone means when they say that. And so I don't find the term good or helpful, but I also want to understand what someone means when they say that.
Right. So yeah, it's definitely
even if I say I'm a northerner because I come from the north and I live in the south. I'm a northerner. I can say that. Does that mean I have my identity is in it? Well, partly maybe. But is it wrong for me to say that anything about myself besides the fact that I'm a Christian? No, we describe ourselves all the time, and that's not necessarily meaning that we are taking our identity in that thing. It's just something that's part of who we are.
Right. So, I guess my experience has been, and I know with talking with Rosaria again, Butterfield, that she was embraced by the church. She was they spent time with her. They loved on her. They shared the gospel with her, and that was the primary focus, not necessarily what she was struggling with sexually. I mean, obviously, I'm sure it came up frequently. She'd have questions. But I think sometimes we don't lead with the gospel. I mean, eventually you have to deal with this, but we're not making sure people know that, hey, we're gonna meet you where you're at. We're going to love you. We're going to accept you as a person. But that doesn't mean accepting your lifestyle necessarily. Is that a good approach?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's the approach that we take with any kind of sin like that. I know of a couple who got drawn back into the church in recent months and became more committed and involved, but they were living together, and so the church, before they could take that, become members and get involved, they had to get married, but it wasn't. It was a gradual kind of challenge and exhortation. And then finally, when they were ready to make this commitment to the church, they made things right in their relationship. And so we have to deal with these kinds of things with people all the time, not just on this issue.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We've been on the phone for going almost a half an hour now. So just... I guess any final recommendations going back to reading? What are you currently reading now?
I'm reading Wendell Berry's novel Hannah Coulter, which is my first novel that I'm reading by Wendell Berry, and I'm quickly becoming a fan. It's a great read during this time because it does harken back to what we think of as a simpler, more rural life, but it I think reading about people from 100 or so years ago, or half a century ago, helps us to see that they have the same struggles and fears that we do, and so it's really a great read.
All right. Well, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to share with our listeners that maybe I didn't ask you about?
I would just tell people that if they have those kind of follow-up questions, you can always find me on Twitter at KS Pryor. I'm on Twitter way too much.
The notorious KSP.
The notorious KSP, yes. That's a long story. But again, I think it just comes from, having more nuanced positions than one often sees out in social media, and that can attract criticism from both sides. And I really am trying to kind of strive for the truth that in the middle of the two extremes. And it's in a polarized society, it's hard to do. And I guess that's what makes me notorious. But it's just a fun nickname, nothing ominous. to it.
Right, right. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that concludes today's episode of the Caffeinated Thoughts podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you happen to be listening to this podcast somewhere other than on our website, please be sure to check out caffeinatedthoughts.com. That's caffeinatedthoughts.com, or just Google Caffeinated Thoughts and we'll show up at the top of your search screen. Also, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and sign up for our emails. That way you don't miss a single update. You can also subscribe to this podcast using your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, Podbean. I think that's all we're on. If there's a podcast app that we're missing that you'd like to see us on, please drop me a line, Shane@caffeinatedthoughts.com. Again, that's Shane@caffeinatedthoughts.com, and I'll look and see if we can make that happen. In the meantime, everybody, hey, pick up a book or a Kindle, and let's get back into the habit of reading. I think we need to do that more. I know I do. So let's do it together, shall we? Until next time, my friends, take care. Bye.